the dress beneath the coat. It began with a whisper, not from anyone else, but from a quiet, persistent place deep inside me. A place I had spent the better part of 28 years trying to ignore. The voice didn't use words, not at first. It was a feeling, a deep, resonant ache that surfaced whenever I saw a woman walk by, the fabric of her dress swaying around her legs, or when I'd catch a glimpse of soft lace in a store window. It was a painful sort of yearning, a phantom limb crying out for an existence it had never known. For years, I had named it anything else curiosity, a strange aesthetic appreciation, even a perversion to be ashamed of. I buried it under layers of flannel shirts, baggy jeans, and the carefully constructed identity of DeAndre, a quiet, unassuming graphic designer who was good at his job and better at being invisible. But the whisper grew. It found words on late, lonely nights, typed into the anonymous void of the internet. What does it feel like? Why do I feel like this? The answers I found were a chaotic mix of academic papers, heartfelt blog posts, and desperate forum threads. In that digital cacophony, I found fragments of myself. I learned words like dysphoria and euphoria, terms that finally gave a name to the profound disconnect I felt with my own reflection and the fleeting, electric joy that thoughts of a different life brought me. And that was how I found Abigail. Her profile on a community support site was simple, her smile warm and genuine. She wasn't a therapist, just someone who had walked a similar path and was willing to talk. Our first few emails were stilted, awkward. I was terrified, convinced that with every word I typed, I was confessing some unforgivable sin. But Abigail's replies were calm, patient, and utterly devoid of judgment. She didn't push or pry. She simply created a space where my whisper could finally speak at a normal volume. After weeks of emails and a few halting phone calls where I could barely get a sentence out, she made a suggestion. Let's meet for coffee. Just to talk. No pressure. No pressure. The words were a lifeline, but they did little to quell the frantic symphony of panic in my chest. Because I had a secret I hadn't even confessed to her, a step I had taken in the privacy of my own apartment. I had bought a dress. It was an impulsive, terrifying purchase made in the online equivalent of a dark alley, a simple cream-colored A-line dress with short sleeves and a modest neckline. When it arrived in a plain brown box, I hid it in the back of my closet for a week, too scared to even touch it. But the whisper was relentless. One night, I took it out. My hands trembled as I slipped off my t-shirt and jeans. The fabric of the dress was cool and smooth against my skin. A sensation so foreign and yet so right. It was like feeling a phantom limb suddenly regain sensation. I couldn't bring myself to look in the mirror. Not yet. The shame was a physical weight, hot and suffocating. Guilt and shame are common feelings for people who cross-dress, often stemming from societal disapproval or personal conflict. Now, standing in my bedroom, the day of my meeting with Abigail, I was about to do the unthinkable. I was going to wear it. Not just in my room, but outside. My hands shook as I pulled the zipper up to my neck. The soft fabric settled around my hips, the hem brushing against my knees. It was a ghost of a touch, a gentle caress that sent a shiver down my spine. This time, I forced myself to look in the mirror. The reflection was a jarring contradiction. My face, with its sharp jaw and the faint shadow of a beard I had painstakingly shaved away, stared back at me from above the delicate cream collar. My broad shoulders strained the seams. My muscular arms looked alien emerging from the short, feminine sleeves. It was wrong. It was all wrong. And yet, beneath the dissonance, a tiny spark flickered. It was the whisper, now a hopeful hum. It was a feeling of comfort, of rightness, that defied logic. This quiet joy, this sense of alignment, was something I'd later learn to call gender euphoria. Panic warred with this nascent feeling. I couldn't go out like this. People would stare. They would laugh. They would know. My eyes landed on my old leather jacket. It was big, bulky, a relic from a past attempt to project a masculinity I didn't feel. An idea formed, a desperate compromise. I slipped it on over the dress. It was a suit of armor. The thick leather hid the soft lines of the dress, disguised my silhouette, and offered a shield against the world. Under the jacket, I was DeAndre. But beneath that layer, a secret fluttered against my skin. The walk to the coffee shop was the longest 10 minutes of my life. Every rustle of the dress under my coat, audible only to me, sounded like a scream. I kept my head down, my hands shoved deep into the jacket pockets, my shoulders hunched. I was convinced every person I passed could see right through my disguise, that they were pointing and whispering about the freak in the leather jacket. When venturing out for the first time, it's advised to stay in well-lit, populated areas to ensure safety. I chose the busiest street I could, hoping to be lost in the crowd. The bell above the coffee shop door chimed, a sound that made me jump. The air was warm, thick with the smell of roasted beans and steamed milk. I scanned the room, my heart hammering against my ribs. And then I saw her. Abigail was sitting at a small table in the corner, just like she'd promised. She looked exactly like her picture-kind eyes, a gentle smile, and an aura of calm that seemed to ripple out from her. She saw me, and her smile widened. There was no shock in her eyes, no confusion, just recognition. As I walked towards her, my legs felt like they were made of lead. My armor, the leather jacket, suddenly felt incredibly hot and heavy. "DeAndre," she asked, her voice soft. I could only nod, my own voice trapped in my throat. "I'm so glad you came," she said, gesturing to the chair opposite her. "You're wearing a very nice jacket." Her eyes were knowing, but not in a way that felt accusatory. It was an empathetic knowing, a shared secret. My face flushed, a wave of heat rising from my neck. "But if you want," she continued, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "I can call you." The question hung in the air between us, a fragile, beautiful thing. It was an invitation, an opportunity to let the whisper out into the light for the first time. My breath hitched. A name I had only ever typed into a private journal. A name that felt both sacred and absurd. Rose to my lips. It came out shaky, barely audible. A confession whispered across the small table. "Fleur." Abigail's smile didn't falter. It softened. "It's lovely to finally meet you, Fleur." And for the first time, hearing that name spoken aloud by someone else, I felt the whisper inside me settle into a profound, peaceful silence. It was home. The first few minutes of our conversation were a blur of caffeine and cortisol. I mumbled my way through ordering a black coffee I didn't want, my hands trembling so badly I was afraid I'd spill it. Abigail waited patiently, her calm a steady anchor in my storm of anxiety. She talked about trivial things: the weather, a funny podcast she'd listened to, the questionable art on the coffee shop walls. It was a gentle gift, a buffer of normalcy that allowed my racing heart to slow to a manageable rhythm. I sat rigidly in my chair, the leather jacket still zipped to my chin. It felt like a cage, hot and constricting, but the thought of taking it off was petrifying. It would mean revealing the cream-colored dress, an act of vulnerability that felt akin to peeling off my own skin. "You know," Abigail said, stirring a spoonful of sugar into her latte, "the first time I wore a skirt in public, I was sure the world was going to end. I bought it at a thrift store and wore 3 pairs of basketball shorts over it just to get it home." I looked up, startled by the confession. "Really?" She nodded, a wry smile playing on her lips. "Oh, absolutely." I walked around the block 3 times before I got the nerve to go inside my own apartment building. My hands were so cold from nerves, I could barely get the key in the lock. I was convinced my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, had X-ray vision and could see the floral pattern right through my front door. A small choked laugh escaped me. The image was so specific, so relatable in its terror, that it chipped away at my own wall of fear. I had imagined Abigail as someone who had it all figured out, someone who had gracefully floated through her transition. Hearing about her own clumsy, terrified beginnings made her wonderfully, beautifully human. It made my own journey feel less like a freakish anomaly and more like a shared experience. Many people in the early stages of transition experience intense fear and anxiety when presenting as their true gender in public for the first time. What made you finally do it?" "Go outside," I asked, my voice still raspy with disuse. She paused, her gaze turning thoughtful. "I think I just got tired of being afraid. The fear of staying the same became bigger than the fear of changing. Does that make sense? The misery of pretending to be someone I wasn't started to hurt more than the potential pain of someone laughing at me. The distress of gender dysphoria can often become a powerful motivator for change, outweighing the fear of social judgment." Her words resonated deep within me. The misery of pretending. That was it. That was the dull, constant ache I had lived with my entire life. It was the exhaustion of performing a role I'd never auditioned for, of speaking lines that felt foreign in my own mouth. I looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. She wore a simple navy blue blouse and dark jeans, with a delicate silver necklace at her throat. There was nothing overtly performative about her femininity. It was just a quiet, confident fact of her being. I felt a pang of envy so sharp it was almost painful, followed by a surge of admiration. I'm wearing a dress," I whispered, the confession tumbling out before I could stop it. Abigail's eyes didn't widen. She didn't gasp. She simply nodded, a look of profound understanding on her face. "I know," she said softly, "and I bet it's beautiful." Her acceptance was so complete, so unconditional, that it brought tears to my eyes. I blinked them back fiercely, mortified. Crying in a coffee shop was a level of emotional exposure I was not prepared for. Increased emotional sensitivity and crying more easily are commonly reported effects of starting estrogen-based hormone therapy, though my own journey hadn't reached that stage yet, and for me, it was simply the overwhelming relief of being seen. We talked for over an hour. I told her about the whisper, the late-night internet searches, the suffocating loneliness. She listened without interruption, her entire focus on me, making me feel like I was the only person in the world. She told me about her own journey, the clumsy attempts with makeup, the joy of hearing her chosen name for the first time, the pain of losing friends who couldn't understand. She painted a picture of transition that wasn't a magical, instantaneous transformation, but a slow, messy, and ultimately rewarding process of becoming. It was a journey of self-discovery, marked by both struggle and incredible joy. As the coffee shop began to empty, a comfortable silence settled between us. The initial terror had faded, replaced by a fragile sense of hope. I felt a connection to this woman, a kinship that transcended the short time we had known each other. We were two souls who understood the same secret language of yearning. A question had been forming in my mind throughout our entire conversation, a childish, insecure plea that I was almost too embarrassed to ask. But looking at Abigail's kind face, I felt a sudden surge of courage. "If I were really a girl," I began, my voice barely a whisper, my eyes fixed on the tabletop. "If I were really like you, would you still want to hold my hand?" The silence that followed was deafening. I immediately regretted it. The question was too much, too intimate, too needy. I had crossed a line. I braced myself for a polite, gentle rejection. But then I felt her hand, warm and soft, cover mine on the table. I flinched, my whole body tensing at the unexpected contact. I slowly lifted my gaze to meet hers. Her expression was impossibly gentle, her eyes shining with an emotion I couldn't quite name. "No, Fleur," she said, her voice full of a warmth that melted the last of my fear. "I would want to hold your hand because you are a girl." Her words were a key turning a lock deep inside me. The distinction was everything, not in spite of, but because of. It wasn't about tolerating a flaw, it was about celebrating a truth. It was the most profound validation I had ever received. A simple sentence that rewrote the narrative of my entire life. The feeling of being correctly gendered and accepted can be a powerful source of gender euphoria, a deep and validating joy, That evening, as I walked home, the leather jacket felt different. It was no longer armor against the world, but a chrysalis. The cool night air felt crisp and clean, and the city lights seemed to sparkle with a newfound brilliance. The fear was still there, a low hum in the background, but it was no longer the dominant note in the symphony of my mind. When I got back to my apartment, I didn't hide in the dark. I walked into my bedroom, stood in front of the full-length mirror, and for the first time, I took off the jacket. I stared at the reflection. DeAndre in a cream-colored dress? No, that wasn't right. The person looking back at me was still a strange mosaic of mismatched pieces. A work in progress, but for the first time. I didn't see a man in a costume. I saw a possibility. I saw a flicker of her. I saw Fleur. I raised a hand, hesitantly tracing the line of the collar on my reflection. And then, I spoke to her. My voice soft but clear in the quiet of the room. "Hello? Fleur," I said. And from the mirror, she smiled back. In the weeks that followed, Abigail's apartment became my sanctuary. It was a modest one-bedroom on the third floor of an old brick building, filled with mismatched furniture, overflowing bookshelves, and the comforting scent of chamomile tea, for me. It was a different world, A safe harbor where the DeAndre I was outside could be shed at the door, allowing Fleur to tentatively step into the light. Our sessions, as we began to call them, were never formal. They were evenings spent on her cozy, well-worn couch, talking. But soon, the talking evolved, seeing my hunger for knowledge, for the practical skills of a life I'd only ever dreamed of. Abigail slowly transformed from a friend into a gentle, patient mentor. Her vanity table became my classroom. It was an altar of femininity, covered in a constellation of compacts, tubes, and brushes that seemed both magical and impossibly complex. I had watched countless makeup tutorials online, but they were a poor substitute for a real, live teacher. "Okay, the first rule of foundation," Abigail said one evening, holding up a small bottle of liquid makeup, "is that less is more. We're not spackling a wall. We're just evening things out." I sat on a small stool before her mirror, stiff and awkward, while she showed me how to dab the foundation onto my skin and blend it with a damp sponge. Her touch was light and professional, but every time her fingers brushed against my cheek, a jolt went through me. It was the intimacy of it, the simple, casual act of being touched in such a gentle way, that felt both thrilling and deeply calming. "Close your eyes," she instructed. I obeyed, feeling the soft bristles of a brush dusting powder across my eyelids. "What's that for?" "Eyeshadow primer. It helps the color stick and prevents it from creasing. A lot of being a girl is just prep work." She laughed. A light, musical sound. She taught me the geometry of eyeliner, the subtle art of filling in my eyebrows to create a softer arch, and the frustrating, fiddly process of applying mascara without poking myself in the eye. Each step was a revelation. I watched in the mirror as the face I knew so well began to transform. The harsh angles softened. My eyes seemed to appear larger and more expressive, and the persistent shadow around my jaw became less noticeable. It was still my face, but it was a version of my face that felt closer to the person I saw in my mind's eye. The process of aligning one's physical appearance with their gender identity is a core component of alleviating gender dysphoria. It wasn't just about the aesthetics. It was about the ritual. The careful, deliberate process of application was a form of meditation. It forced me to study my own face. Not with criticism, but with creative intent. It was an act of claiming ownership, of sculpting my own identity. One evening, after a particularly successful makeup session where I had managed a passable cat eye on my own, Abigail disappeared into her bedroom. She returned holding something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a dress, but unlike the simple, safe cream one I owned, this one was vibrant. It was the color of a peacock's feather, a deep, shimmering teal, made of a fabric that looked like liquid silk. "I was cleaning out my closet," she said, her tone casual, but with a twinkle in her eye. "I think this might be your color." I stared at it, mesmerized and terrified. The color was so bold, so unapologetic. It wasn't a dress for hiding. It was a dress for being seen. I can't," I stammered, my hands instinctively clutching my own drab t-shirt. "Just try it," she urged, holding it out to me. "No one's here but us." My heart hammered against my ribs, but I couldn't refuse. I took the dress from her, the fabric cool and impossibly soft in my hands, in her small bathroom. With the door firmly closed, I changed. Slipping the dress on was a completely different experience from my first one. The silk slithered over my skin, pooling around my feet. It felt decadent, luxurious, and intensely, terrifyingly feminine. When I looked in the mirror, the person staring back was a stranger, with the makeup softening my features and the vibrant teal fabric draping over my frame. The dissonance was less jarring. For a fleeting moment, I didn't see DeAndre in a dress. I saw a woman. A wave of feeling washed over me so intense it made me dizzy. It was a cocktail of shock, excitement, and a profound, bone-deep sense of rightness. It was that feeling again, euphoria. It was like a burst of joy that is fueled by self-actualization. When I finally summoned the courage to open the bathroom door, Abigail was waiting on the couch, pretending to read a book. She looked up, and her breath hitched audibly, her eyes widened, and a slow, genuine smile spread across her face. "Wow," she breathed. "Fleur. Wow." Her reaction was like a balm to my raw nerves. I felt a blush creep up my neck, a warm, pleasant sensation. I gave a clumsy, self-conscious twirl, and the silk skirt swirled around my legs. I struggled for the word. It feels real. "That's because it is," she said, her voice soft but firm. She then guided me through another lesson how to move. Being a girl isn't just about the clothes. She explained, it's about how you occupy space. She showed me how to sit, not with legs sprawled, but with knees together or ankles crossed. She taught me to walk with smaller steps, to let my hips sway naturally instead of holding my torso rigid. It felt unnatural at first, a conscious performance. I stumbled in the pair of low heels she lent me, my ankles wobbling precariously. "Don't worry," she laughed as I grabbed a chair for balance. Everyone feels like a baby deer at first. My feet were a geography of blisters for the first 6 months. That night, as I changed back into my DeAndre clothes, a wave of sadness washed over me. The rough denim of my jeans felt abrasive against my skin. The baggy t-shirt felt like a sack. It was like putting on a costume after the play was over. The contrast was stark, and the feeling of dysphoria, the sense of wrongness about my assigned gender was sharper and more painful than ever before. When I was ready to leave, Abigail stopped me at the door. She reached out and gently adjusted the collar of my jacket. "You know," she said, her eyes meeting mine, "the world can be a scary place, but you don't have to face it all at once. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is just learn how to apply lipstick." I left her apartment that night with more than just a memory of silk and the faint scent of her perfume on my skin. I left with a sense of purpose. I wasn't just playing dress-up anymore. I was learning. I was training. I was preparing for a life that was waiting for me, a life that shimmered with the same vibrant, terrifying promise as a peacock teal dress. The teal dress or the peacock dress, as I'd started calling it in my head, became a fixture in my lessons with Abigail. Trying it on was the reward at the end of our sessions, a confirmation of the progress I was making, but it remained confined to the sanctuary of her apartment. The idea of wearing something so conspicuous in public was a mountain I wasn't ready to climb. My simple cream dress, hidden under a jacket, was my armor for the outside world. The teal dress was a secret, sacred vestment. One sunny Saturday afternoon, about 2 months after our first meeting, Abigail proposed a new challenge. "I know a place," she said. her tone light but deliberate. "It's a small clothing boutique downtown. The owner is a friend, and the space is safe. I thought we could go, just to look around. You could wear the dress." My blood ran cold. Outside the teal one. "It's not teal, it's cerulean," she corrected gently, a small smile playing on her lips. And yes, outside, in the daylight, with me. Every instinct screamed no. The boutique might be safe, but the journey there was a gauntlet. The bus ride, the walk from the stop, the countless eyes of strangers, it felt like an impossible trial. Navigating public spaces as a visibly trans person can be fraught with anxiety and potential danger, requiring a high degree of vigilance. What if someone recognizes me? The question was a familiar refrain, the anthem of my fear. Abigail's response was, as always, both gentle and unyielding. "When they see you, Fleur, they will only see a beautiful girl in a beautiful dress. The rest is just noise in your own head." The internal battle raged for days. It was a war between the paralyzing fear of exposure and the deep, desperate yearning to be seen, truly seen, as myself. The yearning, nurtured by Abigail's unwavering support, finally won. The day we were set to go. My apartment felt like a backstage dressing room before a terrifying opening night. I had practiced my makeup for hours, my hands shaking so much I had to redo my eyeliner 3 times. Shaving had to be perfect, a meticulous process that left my skin raw and sensitive. I slipped on the dress, the cool silk a familiar comfort and a terrifying promise. Then came the underwear, a pair of simple, soft cotton panties and my first ever bra. A lightly padded t-shirt bra Abigail had helped me pick out online. The feeling of the band around my chest was strange, a constant, gentle pressure that was both constricting and oddly affirming. It was another layer of the identity I was building, piece by piece. When Abigail arrived to pick me up, she looked me over with a critical but kind eye. "You look amazing," she said. "Just one thing." She handed me a small, weighted object. It was a simple, elegant silver clutch. You can't exactly stuff your wallet in a dress pocket. Welcome to the tyranny of the purse. Holding the clutch felt incredibly strange. It forced me to change my posture, to carry myself differently. It was another small detail in the grand, complicated performance of gender. We took a ride share to avoid the ordeal of public transit. I sat in the back, my back ramrod straight, my hands clutching the silver bag in my lap. I was convinced the driver was staring at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes filled with judgment. I kept my gaze fixed out the window, watching the familiar streets of my city look utterly alien from this new perspective. When we arrived, I hesitated on the sidewalk. The boutique, named Willow and Bloom, had a charming green awning and a window display of flowing floral dresses. It looked welcoming, but my feet felt rooted to the concrete. "Ready?" Abigail asked, her hand hovering near the small of my back, not touching but offering support. I took a deep, shuddering breath and nodded. The bell above the door chimed, a delicate, cheerful sound. The inside of the shop smelled of lavender and clean linen. It was quiet, with only one other customer browsing a rack of scarves. A woman with short, stylish gray hair and chic glasses stood behind the counter. She looked up as we entered, and her face broke into a warm smile. Abby. So good to see you, she said, her voice rich and friendly. Then her eyes moved to me, and my entire body tensed, bracing for the inevitable flicker of confusion, the slight narrowing of the eyes as she tried to reconcile my features with my clothes. But it never came. Her smile simply widened. And hello to you. That color is absolutely stunning on you. She looked back at Abigail. What can I help you two ladies with today? Two ladies. The words hit me with the force of a physical blow, but a pleasant one. It was like a wave of warm water washing over me, dissolving the rigid knot of fear in my stomach. Ladies. She had looked at me, at this strange, terrified creature in a bright dress, and seen a woman. The external validation was a powerful form of gender euphoria, confirming my internal sense of self. Même, mesdames, ma chère. I must have been staring, dumbstruck, because Abigail gently nudged me forward. My friend Fleur is looking for something for a summer party, she said smoothly. Covering for my silence? The owner, who introduced herself as Clara, was wonderful. She didn't hover or pressure. She showed me fabrics, talked about different cuts, and treated me with the same casual, friendly respect she showed Abigail. At one point, I caught my reflection in a large mirror. A tall woman in a cerulean dress stood awkwardly next to her friend, a silver clutch held in a white-knuckled grip. For a second, I didn't recognize myself. The image was so close to the one I held in my heart for so long. I didn't buy anything that day. The idea of actually trying on clothes, of navigating a fitting room, was still too overwhelming. But the goal wasn't to shop. The goal was to exist, to walk into a public space as Fleur and walk out again, unscathed. The ride home was completely different. I still sat straight, but the rigidity was gone. I wasn't cowering. I was glowing. The fear hadn't vanished, but it had been pushed to the background by a triumphant, soaring feeling of joy. I had done it. I had walked in the world as myself, and the world hadn't ended. In fact, it had welcomed me. Back at my apartment, after Abigail had left, I stood in front of my mirror, still wearing the dress. The makeup was starting to fade, and the awkward, scared man was a little more visible underneath. But something fundamental had shifted. The image in the mirror no longer felt like a dream or a fantasy. It felt like a preview, a promise. I had survived my first venture out of the sanctuary. The experience was a crucial step, moving from the private exploration of my identity to a public expression of it. I had been seen, not as a man in a dress, but as one of two ladies shopping for the afternoon. And that simple, unremarkable moment was the most remarkable thing that had ever happened to me. The fear was still real, but for the first time, so was the hope. The success of our trip to the boutique was a turning point. It didn't erase my fears, but it proved they could be survived. It emboldened me, slowly, tentatively. I started to integrate Fleur into more of my life. It began with small, almost imperceptible changes. I started wearing clear nail polish. I bought women's jeans, which had a softer feel and a fit that felt more aligned with my body. I even started wearing a light, unisex perfume every day. These were small acts of rebellion against the life I was supposed to be living. Tiny flags planted in newly claimed territory. 6 months after I first met Abigail, I made the biggest decision of my life, with her help. I found a doctor who specialized in transgender care and, after several consultations and a thorough psychological evaluation, I started hormone replacement therapy, HRT. The doctor warned me that the changes would be slow. A second puberty played out over months and years. The first effects weren't physical, but emotional. About a month into the treatment, I found myself weeping uncontrollably at a commercial for long-distance phone calls. The sudden, intense wave of emotion was so alien that it was almost comical. My emotional landscape, once a flat, muted terrain, was becoming a place of rolling hills and sudden, unexpected valleys. Estrogen therapy is known to increase emotional sensitivity and access to a wider range of feelings. I became more empathetic, more attuned to the feelings of others. Conversations with friends took on a new depth. I felt more connected, more present. It was as if a filter had been removed from my senses, allowing me to experience the world in a richer, more vibrant spectrum. My close friends commented that I seemed lighter and more at peace. But it also meant I was more vulnerable. A thoughtless comment could sting for hours, and the ever-present anxiety about my transition could sometimes swell into debilitating panic attacks. The physical changes began subtly. My skin, once prone to oiliness and rough patches, started to soften. The scent of my own body changed, losing its musky edge and becoming sweeter, more subtle. I noticed a slight decrease in my muscle mass, a softening of the sharp angles in my shoulders and arms. One of the most common early effects of anti-androgens and estrogen is a reduction in libido, which for me was a welcome reprieve from a drive that had always felt disconnected from my true self. The most significant early change, however, was in my chest. One morning, I woke up with a dull, persistent ache around my nipples. When I prodded the area, I felt small, hard lumps underneath, breast buds. The physical evidence that my body was truly, fundamentally changing. Breast development often begins with tenderness and the formation of these buds within the first 6 months of HRT. I stared at my reflection in the mirror that morning, my t-shirt lifted, and felt a profound sense of wonder. My body, which for so long had felt like a prison, was now becoming a home. It was collaborating with me, responding to the truth I had finally spoken aloud. The process was both thrilling and terrifying. Each new change was a step further away from the man everyone knew, and a step closer to the woman only I could see. Of course, this journey wasn't without its awkward, painful moments. There was the in-between stage, a sort of gender purgatory where I didn't look distinctly male or female. Strangers' eyes would linger on me, their brows furrowed in confusion. I'd get called sir and ma'am in the same shopping trip, each misgendering a small paper cut on my soul. My facial hair, though thinning slightly from the hormones, was still a daily battle, a stubborn reminder of the biology I was fighting against. Makeup became less of a tool for transformation and more of a necessity for survival. A way to cover the shadow that caused so much dysphoria. It was during this difficult period that Abigail's friendship became my anchor. She was the one person who saw me not as a confusing collection of changing parts, but as a whole person. She celebrated every small victory the first time I was correctly gendered by a cashier, the day my favorite pair of old jeans no longer fit over my subtly widening hips. She also helped me navigate the complexities of our evolving relationship. There was an undeniable intimacy between us, a bond forged in vulnerability and shared experience. But was it friendship? Or was it something more? The lines were blurry, and I was terrified of misreading them, of jeopardizing the most important relationship in my life. The dynamics of intimate relationships often shift and require renegotiation during a partner's transition. Tiol. One evening, we were sitting on her floor, sorting through a box of her old photos. She pulled out a picture of a sullen, awkward-looking teenager with a bad haircut and a forced smile. That was me. Age 16, she said with a sigh. Back then, I was trying so hard to be the son my father wanted. I played football. I even tried to grow a terrible mustache. I looked from the photo to the confident, radiant woman beside me. The transformation was breathtaking. How did you survive it? I asked, my voice full of awe. How did you get from there to here? Abigail grew quiet, her gaze distant. Piece by piece, she said softly. And I wasn't alone. I had someone who saw past the awkward kid and the bad mustache. Someone who saw me. Her words hung in the air, imbued with a significance that went beyond the photograph. She was talking about her past, but she was also talking about us. She was telling me, in her own indirect way, that she saw me, not the work in progress, not the collection of anxieties and hopes, but the real, essential fleur underneath it all. In that moment, looking at her, I felt a surge of affection so powerful it almost knocked the wind out of me. It wasn't just gratitude. It was deeper, warmer, more complex. I saw her not just as a mentor or a savior, but as a person, a beautiful, strong, and wonderfully kind person. The reflection I saw in her eyes was clearer than any mirror. It showed me a woman worthy of friendship, of respect, and maybe, just maybe, of love. The hormones were changing my body, but it was Abigail's unwavering belief in me that was changing my soul. The idea of a first date came from Abigail, but it felt like a natural culmination of everything that had been building between us. By this point, a year had passed since I had started my hormonal journey. The changes were no longer subtle. My face had softened, fat redistributing to my cheeks and lips. I had noticeable breasts that gave my torso a gentle curve, and my waist had begun to taper. I was still recognizably me, but the reflection in the mirror was undeniably, irrevocably female. We should celebrate, she'd said one evening, as we were sharing a pizza on her living room floor. Celebrate what I asked, pulling a piece of pepperoni off my slice. The 1-year mark, she said, her eyes sparkling. And more than that, we should celebrate you. We should go out. Somewhere nice. Not as teacher and student. Not as friends hiding in here. She paused, her gaze steady and meaningful. As us. The implication was clear, and it sent a flutter of nervous excitement through my chest. This wouldn't be just another trip out into the world. This would be different. Like a date I asked. My voice small. She smiled, exactly like a date. The preparation for that evening felt monumental. It was more than just getting ready. It was a culmination of every lesson, every tear, every small victory of the past year and a half. I chose my outfit with painstaking care, a simple, elegant black wrap dress that accentuated my new curves, sheer black stockings, and a pair of sensible but chic black heels that I could walk in without looking like I was crossing a tightrope. As I sat at my own vanity, a small desk I had converted into my personal space of transformation, I applied my makeup with a newfound confidence. My hands were steady. The strokes of the eyeliner brush were sure. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror was no longer a stranger. Her eyes were my eyes. Her smile, though nervous, was my own. It was a feeling of deep joy and excitement, the essence of gender euphoria that comes when your internal sense of self aligns with your physical presentation. Guillaume. When Abigail arrived, she was breathtaking. She wore a deep red dress that complemented her dark hair, and she'd pinned a small, sparkling clip behind one ear. For a moment, we just stood in my doorway, taking each other in. "You look," she started, her voice a little shaky. "So do you," I finished, a genuine, unforced smile spreading across my face. We went to a quiet Italian restaurant in a part of town I'd never been to, a place with candlelit tables and a hushed, romantic atmosphere. As we walked in, I felt the familiar flicker of anxiety, the automatic scanning of the room for judging eyes. But something was different this time. With Abigail at my side, her hand resting lightly on my arm, I felt a sense of belonging. We were just two women out for a nice dinner. The thought was so simple, so normal, and yet so revolutionary. Our conversation flowed easily. We didn't talk about transition or hormones or fear. We talked about books, about terrible movies we secretly loved, about dreams for the future. I found myself laughing, a real, uninhibited laugh that came from my belly. I flirted, clumsily at first, then with a bit more courage as she responded with a playful smile and a light blush on her cheeks. Halfway through our meal, she reached across the table and took my hand. Her thumb gently stroked my knuckles. It wasn't the supportive, comforting touch she had given me in the coffee shop so long ago. This was different. It was charged with a quiet electricity, a tenderness that spoke volumes. "I'm so proud of you." "Fleur," she whispered. Tears pricked my eyes, but they were happy tears. "I couldn't have done it without you," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "You would have," she insisted. "You were always there, just waiting for the chance to come out. I just held the door open for you." After dinner, we walked through a small park near the restaurant. The air was cool, and the sounds of the city were a distant hum. I shivered slightly, and Abigail, without a word, took off the light shawl she was wearing and draped it around my shoulders. It smelled faintly of her perfume. We stopped by a stone fountain, the water glistening under the park lights. We stood in silence for a long moment, the unspoken feelings between us palpable in the quiet space. "Fleur," she began, turning to face me. "When I first met you, DeAndre, I saw someone who was so trapped, so full of pain. But I also saw a spark of someone incredible waiting underneath. And now I asked, my heart beating a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Now," she said, her hand coming up to gently cup my cheek. Her touch was electric. "Now, all I see is her, and she's even more wonderful than I imagined." She leaned in slowly, giving me every opportunity to pull away. I didn't. I leaned in to meet her, my eyes fluttering shut. Her lips were soft, warm, and tasted faintly of the wine we'd had with dinner. The kiss was gentle, hesitant at first, then deepening with a year's worth of unspoken emotion. It wasn't a kiss of passion in the fiery sense, but one of profound tenderness, of recognition, of coming home. In that single, perfect moment, I wasn't a project, a student, or a person in transition. I was a woman being kissed by a woman who saw her, who valued her, who cared for her. when we finally broke apart. We rested our foreheads together, our breath mingling in the cool night air. "So," she whispered, a smile in her voice, "is this our first date as girlfriends?" I laughed, a sound full of joy and relief. "I think it is." Walking home that night, hand in hand, the world felt brand new. The journey was far from over. I knew there would still be challenges, moments of fear, and days of doubt. But I wasn't walking that path alone anymore. I had someone by my side, not just as a guide, but as a partner. The woman I was becoming was finally learning how to love, and how to be loved in return. The years that followed our first date unfolded with a quiet, beautiful rhythm. Our relationship, built on a foundation of such profound trust and understanding, blossomed. Abigail's apartment, once my sanctuary, became our shared home. My few belongings merged with hers, my makeup finding a permanent home on the vanity where my transformation had truly begun. Living as Fleur full-time was a gradual process, not a sudden switch. I changed my name legally, an emotional day spent in a sterile government building that ended with me holding a piece of paper that finally reflected my reality. I came out at work, a terrifying experience that was met with a surprising and wonderful amount of support from my colleagues. Each step was a brick laid in the foundation of my new life. There were, of course, hardships. I lost contact with some extended family members who couldn't, or wouldn't, understand. There were still days when a stranger's snide comment or a deliberately cruel "sir" could send me spiraling into a pit of dysphoria. The world didn't change overnight, but what had changed was my ability to face it. I was no longer a frightened whisper. With Abigail by my side, I had found my voice. The physical changes from the hormones continued, subtly reshaping my body into a form that felt like my own. My face grew rounder, my hips filled out, and my breasts settled into a soft, natural shape. The process was slow, a gentle sculpting by an invisible hand. It required patience, and an acceptance that my body would find its own unique equilibrium, tasan. But the most profound transformation was internal. The constant, grinding anxiety that had been the soundtrack to my life as DeAndre faded. In its place grew a quiet confidence, a sense of peace that came from the simple, radical act of living authentically. I discovered new facets of my personality that had been buried under layers of pretense. I was funnier than I thought, more outgoing, more resilient. I found joy in simple things, the swish of a skirt against my legs on a breezy day, the camaraderie of chatting with women in a store, the simple pleasure of seeing my own, true reflections smiling back at me in a window. This consistent state of feeling right and at ease in my own skin was the enduring form of gender euphoria. Abigail and I built a life together. We adopted a scruffy terrier mix named Buster. We argued about who left wet towels on the floor and debated what to watch on TV. Our love wasn't a dramatic, cinematic romance. It was a real, lived-in partnership, full of mundane moments that were more precious to me than any grand gesture. Our intimacy evolved, becoming a space of exploration and deep emotional connection, where our shared vulnerability only strengthened our bond. I also found a new purpose, drawing on my own experiences. I started volunteering at a local LGBTQ+ center, facilitating a support group for newly questioning and transitioning individuals. I saw my own fear, my own hope, reflected in their faces. I would tell them about my first time wearing a dress under a leather jacket, about my terror and my triumph in the little boutique. I tried to be for them what Abigail had been for me, a calm, reassuring voice that said, "I see you. You are valid. You are not alone." One crisp autumn evening, 5 years after our first date, Abigail and I were walking Buster in the park. The leaves were a riot of red and gold, and the air was sharp with the promise of winter. We stopped by the same fountain where we'd shared our first kiss. Abigail turned to me, her face serious, but her eyes soft. "Fleur," she said, taking both of my hands in hers. "These last few years, watching you become yourself, it has been the greatest honor of my life." My heart swelled. "Abby!" She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, velvet box. My breath caught in my throat. "I know we've built a life without needing papers or titles," she continued, her voice trembling slightly. "But I want the world to know what I know, that you are my person, my partner, my wife." She opened the box. Inside wasn't a traditional ring. It was a delicate silver locket. She opened it, and on one side was a tiny, engraved peacock feather. Tears streamed down my face as I nodded, unable to speak. "Yes," I finally choked out. "Yes, of course. Yes." Our wedding was small and perfect, held in the backyard of a friend's house, surrounded by the found family who had supported us on our journey. I didn't wear a traditional white gown. Instead, I wore a simple, elegant dress the color of a peacock's feather. It felt like coming full circle. The dress that had once been a symbol of my deepest fears and boldest hopes was now the garment in which I pledged my life to the woman who had made it all possible. As I stood there, holding Abigail's hands and repeating my vows, I looked out at the faces of our friends. I saw the quiet kid from my support group, who had just started wearing skirts in public. I saw Clara, the boutique owner, who had been the first stranger to call me lady. I saw my colleagues from work and my scruffy dog Buster, who was serving as a very enthusiastic ring bearer. In that moment, I realized that Fleur was no longer a name I was trying on, or a role I was learning to play. It wasn't a separate identity I stepped into. The line between DeAndre and Fleur had long since dissolved. There was no before and after anymore. There was only me, whole, complete, and profoundly, deeply happy. Years later, our life has settled into a comfortable, beautiful routine. Our small apartment is filled with the evidence of a shared existence, 2 coffee mugs by the sink, a collection of well-loved books spilling from the shelves, and dog toys perpetually underfoot. The grand, dramatic moments of my transition have given way to the quiet, steady joy of simply living. Sometimes, in a quiet moment, I'll catch my reflection unexpectedly in a shop window, a darkened screen, or the polished surface of a tabletop. For a split second, a flicker of surprise still registers, not because I see a stranger, but because the woman looking back is so utterly, completely familiar. She is me. The external reality has finally, fully merged with my internal truth. I have laugh lines around my eyes now, and a few silver threads in my hair. The face that looks back at me is no longer a canvas for skillful makeup to create an illusion. It is simply my face. The hormones have worked their slow magic, softening the last of the hard edges, but time and life have etched their own story there as well. One rainy afternoon, I was cleaning out a storage closet and came across a box of old things I'd never had the heart to throw away. Inside, tucked beneath some old college textbooks, was the black leather jacket. I pulled it out, the leather cool and heavy in my hands. It smelled faintly of dust and forgotten memories. I slipped it on. It was snug across my shoulders and tight in the arms. My body had changed in ways that made this old armor obsolete. Standing in front of the bedroom mirror, I saw the woman I was now wearing the coat of the terrified man I used to be. The contrast was stark. The jacket was a relic from a different life, a chrysalis I had shed long ago. I remembered the man who had worn it, his shoulders hunched, his eyes downcast, hiding a precious, terrifying secret. I felt a wave of compassion for him, for his fear and his loneliness. He hadn't been wrong or broken. He had just been doing the best he could to survive until I was ready to be born. I took the jacket off and folded it carefully. It wasn't something to be discarded with shame, but a piece of my history to be acknowledged with gratitude. It had protected a fragile dream until it was strong enough to face the light. Later that evening, Abigail found me sitting by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, wrapping her arms around me from behind and resting her chin on my shoulder. "The man who used to own my leather jacket," I said softly. She understood immediately. She squeezed me gently. "He was very brave," she said. "He led you to me." "That he did," I whispered, leaning my head back against hers. Our life is not a fairy tale ending. It is something far better. It is real. There are still moments of doubt, flashes of insecurity, and the lingering scars of a lifetime spent at odds with myself. But they are just that moments. They no longer define me. What defines me is the warmth of Abigail's hand in mine. What defines me is the satisfaction of my work, both as a designer and as a mentor. What defines me is the simple, profound peace of waking up each morning in a body that feels like home. Sometimes I think back to that terrified person in the coffee shop, whispering a question born of a desperate need for acceptance. If I were really a girl, would you still want to hold my hand? I smile, because I know the answer was so much more than a simple yes. The answer was this life, this love, this peace. The answer was everything. The woman in the mirror is no longer a possibility or a hope. She is a fact. She is a wife, a dog owner, a friend, a mentor. She is flawed and strong, happy and whole. She is me, and she is finally, completely, wonderfully free.